welcome to the first overpaint video. Today's theme is going to be about light. And here are the 3 paintings that I'm going to be working on. So I'll make these paintings really pop just by adjusting the light, because light isn't there just for the sake of realism. It also serves a storytelling purpose. We can adjust the light to best convey a certain mood, and light also serves a compositional aspect, meaning we can manipulate light where it falls and with what intensity, so that it best emphasizes our subject matter. So for this image, the first thing that stands out are these extremely bright highlights on her clothes, and they seem to appear quite sporadically. The same thing happens on her skin, where we see this brightness on her face, and in the meanwhile her hand, which is very close to the fire, it's pretty much dark. The way light travels away from one point, it has to cover more and more surface. So it gets exponentially weaker, and I'm going to try to convey that in this image. It's pretty much as you can see in this graph here. The surface increases, but the number of photons stays the same. One thing I did, which is not necessary, but I figured it will make things more clear for you to understand what I'm thinking, is I removed one of the lights, one of the fill lights that was falling on her face. Pretty much only did that for the clarity of the video, so you know which light goes where. For the moon, I'm thinking to give it a soft light that's falling on her, because unlike the fire in her hand, the moon is a very large light source. So I want to try and show that and have this moonlight envelop her. I don't know, it does simplify my life at the same time. I'm not very happy with what I've done here, and the thing that's super complicated is that the transition from the darkest shadow to the brightest light will usually also imply changes in hue and saturation. And these changes don't happen linearly. If you mess things up and you mix the wrong colors, then what's gonna happen is you'll get a desaturated effect and things are just gonna look muddy. Some colors that just shouldn't exist are going to appear on the canvas and mess things up. The way I deal with this is I desaturate an entire area and then I use curves to add the color back in. So this lets me assign different colors to different value levels. So I can make the shadows a certain color and the lights a certain color depending on their intensity. So if you want to save time when painting, this is one of the techniques I find that makes the biggest difference. I'm not super happy with the hair, like I wanted to make a quick fix and give it some volume, but at the same time I created a whole bunch of new problems because I introduced pretty heavy texture and it just stands out like this is how you should do it, but at the same time, no, that's not what I mean. Like, you don't do what I did, just see the good stuff in what I did and apply that and ignore the rest, but maybe you're not going to ignore it, maybe you'll take it seriously, and I wouldn't be able to live with that, so I think I'll be adjusting it again. You probably noticed this painting was super detailed to begin with, so this is taking me a considerable amount of time. Like, considering I'm doing 3 overpaints for this video, and then there's a lot of editing required as well, I kinda have to limit myself in which areas I work on and leave certain things aside that we can discuss another time. Especially since certain fundamentals that I want to talk about are like huge topics, like they could be worth their own video. So yeah, I'm not an experienced art teacher or anything, so all I'm doing here is making suggestions and showing you how I would interpret these images and how I would solve certain problems that you're facing. I was thinking to call this finished at this point, but I'm very tempted to do some tweaking to the background, especially since this video is about light. So now for the reflection on the sea, I looked up some references because I had no idea, and it turns out the moon would actually brighten up the ocean considerably. And I'm gonna refrain from detailing stuff, so I'm just adding some rough texture for the waves and whatnot, just so you can see the thinking behind it. But yeah, like that's... Now about the pillars, like I've seen, and I'm sure you have as well, I've seen a lot of extremely good artists who just make a huge mess of things and random brush strokes, and then it suddenly looks like something, and it's believable, and it's cool, and it has this punch that they seem to be just messing around, just sketching. It has this dynamic brush strokes everywhere, and it's cool, and it looks easy to do at the same time. So we jump into it, and then what we make looks like a mess, right? So yeah, I've been there personally, and looking at this, I feel like that's similar to what you're experiencing. And I think I actually figured out the secret to what makes those things work. So those artists, they make a mess out of the colors and textures they use, but at the same time, they never mess with value. Like, the geometry of the object is always very well described. For example, if they're painting a cylinder, they will absolutely respect the roundness of that thing. And yeah, values are obviously the thing that makes us understand the geometry of something. In other words, it's basically the way the light wraps around an object. Because when light falls perpendicularly on a face, that face lights up. And then if it falls at an angle, it gets progressively less bright. So yeah, those are our brain, like, geometry stuff. So you told me that detailing stuff is the part that you find most difficult, that it takes you too much time. Like the trick with the curves, and now the thing about volume. And I want to add, when planning your painting, you really don't need to include elements that don't support your composition. Like, things don't have to appear in a place just because they happen to be there. Of course, that can add some authenticity, but usually that's not what you want. Usually you want a cool picture, and you want to tell a story through every item that you add. So it's perfectly okay if everything is intentional. And I actually used to be all for authenticity, so I actually was kind of repulsed by the idea of composition. Like, I didn't want to organize anything, I didn't want to plan anything. I wanted things to just fall where they would be in real life. A bit like taking amateur photos, because they're more believable than, you know, Hollywood stuff. Like, often I would watch movies and just think they look too much like movies, they are too color graded, they don't look like real life at all, so I find it hard to take them seriously. So authenticity is great, but I think it takes such an insane amount of time extra than what you would normally spend on a painting, that it's really important that you ask the question whether you want something to be authentic or you just want it to be cool. Because if you just want it to be cool, it's perfectly fine. Like, go to ArtStation and look on the front page, and literally everything is trying to be cool, you know? That's the stuff we actually like, because, you know, we understand what the story is about. We don't get confused by all the side elements. Like, imagine there was a bug on her. Like, it could happen, right? Bugs happen. But at the same time, it would be pretty weird and distracting, and it would pretty much waste the entire painting. So, authentic or not, do whatever makes a better painting and a better story. Okay, that's about it. I'm pretty happy with the result. Some qualities of the original did get lost in the process. And well, I guess it's because the original was a finished piece, and in the meantime what I did was to pretty much start over and try a different path without finishing. Look, I'm defending myself, almost like I'm insecure. So, for this image, she seems to be looking at something that's possibly the intended light source, but at the same time some areas don't reflect that. It seems as though the light is coming from the bottom, if we're looking at her hand especially. I'm going to choose to have the light be coming from above, and you said that she's looking at something glowing, and I imagine that to be some sort of magic. So I don't want the color of the light to be just white. I'll give it some sort of a purplish hue, and I'll apply that to the different materials that we have in this scene. For painting skin, I use a very soft brush. If I try blending with it, you see, it just suddenly looks so much more like skin. Because when you're using rough brushes, they create not just texture, but they create the illusion that there is a much more complicated geometry going on rather than smooth skin. Like, if you want to add texture to skin, you have to make sure that that texture seems to be wrapping smoothly around the geometry of the skin instead of being a new geometry on its own, I guess. So yeah, this stuff is very easy to fix. Like, just get a blending brush and blend away and you'll get a much more realistic skin. Being smooth is like its defining feature. I see from your painting that you did delimit some light areas and some shadow areas, but then for the shadow areas, it seems as though you have two types of shadow. Like, you have this one and then you have this one. And I feel like you're not sure where you're supposed to put each of those or how exactly, how dark they should go. So think about it like this. Shadow is just the absence of the light. We have light and then we have either blackness or, in this case, and usually, we have ambient light. This ambient light is coming from all directions and it's going to reach her skin in every place where it's not obstructed by something, such as in tight areas around her face or under her hand, for example, or where her hands get inserted in the cloth. That doesn't sound very literary. You can see how I apply it inside the palm of her hand, like how the thumb blocks some of the light. If you're not in a dark room right now, you can try closing your fist and see the ambient occlusion happening inside. It's actually a very subtle effect. For the helmet, you mentioned this was silver and you're not sure how to approach it. The thing about metals though is that they are reflective, so silver would definitely not look white in this context. It would be catching everything there is around it. So all that red there is in the background, as well as whatever is in front of her. And we don't know what's in front of her, we have to imagine it and then draw it on the silver. I made this other video recently where I explained the different types of materials, meaning metallic and dielectric materials, how they interact with the light, so you might want to check that out. Here, where I'm doing these stripes on the metal, I'm actually drawing the reflection of what is exactly above her, like I'm imagining something. When these clouds receive light, some of that light is going to bounce, so I wanted to add some red light onto her. Now, an interesting thing about light is that if the color of the light and the color of the object are opposite, you know, like if they're complementary, like in this case, green and red, then the green object is not going to brighten up as it receives red light. I'm thinking to stop here, and I realize I made a big mistake in the fact that the place where she's looking doesn't match the light source. Like, the light is coming from the side and the place she's looking at is right in front of her. And that means her entire face would be in the light as well as most of her body. But that's not what we have. So I'm going to make the cheapest fix in the world and move her eyes. So yeah, like, don't do this for your own paintings, be a bit more prepared than I was. When doing an overpaint, I'm always a bit conflicted about what I should change and what I should leave, because I can't change everything on every submission. And because of that, I end up cutting corners and then I regret cutting corners, but at the same time, I don't have a choice but to cut certain things. I hope with time I'll develop an intuition to tell me what to work on and how to structure these videos, but for now, just I could stop here, but I can't resist to do some edits to the background as well, because it's actually super simple. Like, I'll just use a textured blending brush and get rid of all these hard edges that you have everywhere. And if you look at your favorite artists right now, I'm sure that all of them are using soft and lost edges like 90% of the time. And then when they do hard edges, they really stand out, like they're all in the right place and their painting looks just right. All the submissions today have too many hard edges everywhere. And I think one day I'll do an overpaint where I do nothing except to blur stuff. And it will be amazing because it's really that simple. So thanks for the submission. I hope this helps you to understand how to handle shadows, specifically ambient occlusion, understanding metal a bit more, as well as understanding how to deal with colored light. Next, we're going to be overpainting this turtle shell cat. I had 2 turtle shell cats before, they're really amazing animals. I remember when I wanted to adopt one of them from a website. My mother was like, no way you're adopting that cat, it's ugly. And I was like, no, it's not ugly. And then we called a guy who has the cats. And I'm like, yeah, I want the cat. And he's like, but we don't have them anymore. Because there was a picture with more cats. We don't have them anymore. We only have the ugly one. So I'm like, yeah, that one. And he just starts laughing and says, okay. Now, about the painting, just like in the other paintings, we're having a lot of hard edges everywhere. So what I'm going to do is take a fur-like brush, something like this, and just blend everything. Do you see the difference it makes? Like, it's already looking like fur. What you have already looks very realistic from a distance. But when we zoom in, our eyes just panic and we don't know where to look. It's overwhelming, and there isn't even a clear focus on her face. Like, even her eyes, they're very like lost in this sea of detail. Now, one of the most important things in painting animal portraits is knowing how to convey the difference between many different types of fur. Just like with human skin, animal fur is very complex and has a lot of variations. For example, the fur on the nose, the fur on the mouth, on the chin, on the eyebrows, on the head, on the ears. All of these are different. So for the ears here, I'm going to brush the hair outwards and then brush it back in to create this effect that we're having short hair. I'm going to paint some hairs individually. And I try to make sure I blend them into the cat so they seem to come out organically. They're not just added on top. In other words, I try blurring parts of the hair until it looks right. At this point, I'm kind of finished over painting what was essential. And for the light, what you did is already perfectly fine, because when we do animal portraits, usually what we want is to have a very, very soft light and pretty much no shadows. And that way, a soft animal with a soft light looks even softer, and I guess that's good. But just to create more interest, I decided to have more contrast in the image. And at this point, I'm thinking the wall behind the cat is really not helping, because it's blocking some of the light, and I want it to seem as if the light is coming slightly from behind the cat. So I removed the background, and guess what? It just instantly looks so much more photogenic, like almost like the cat is inside a studio with those big white umbrellas casting light on it. I think that's pretty cool. Now, keep in mind, this needs a lot more work for the lights to look realistic, but I hope what I did is enough to send the message across about what is possible to achieve. And yeah, if somebody sent me a picture like this of their pet and asked me to make a portrait, this is pretty much how I would handle it. I would try to make it interesting. Like, I never make an artwork just to replicate something. I always try to add something on top. Something more than just happy accidents, because a painting kind of has value because it's painted. Like, you instinctively know that something that's made manually is a bit more valuable than something that's not, but at the same time, I don't think that's enough. So yeah, looking at the before and after, both close-up and from a distance, I'm pretty happy with the result, and I hope you can see just how easy it was to do this. Like, I really hope you will try to apply what I did in this video and get similar results right away. Alright, good job making it to the end. The theme for next month is going to be about color. If you want to submit your artwork for a chance to have it overpainted, all you have to do is comment a link to the artwork, and that's it. I'm going to pick the submissions that fit my needs to make an interesting video. But next time I'll make it into a contest so everybody has a fair chance.